They used to be the Washington Redskins. Now they're the Washington football team. Mascots and teams around the country, pro, college, and high school alike, are changing their names. For what reason? PC, pressure. We're going to talk about that in just a second. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Infinity Sports. I'm Wayne G. I'm joined by two awesome co-hosts today, Dan Sully Sullivan. What's going on, Sully?
Oh, living the dream, man.
And Nick Paquin. What's going on? Back by popular demand.
What's up? Thanks for having me again. Soon you'll be sick of me.
No, I don't think so. I love the contrarian beliefs. Obviously, we're going to do things a little bit different today. If you guys want to check us out on social media, you want to check us out on iTunes, you can skip to the end of the video. We're going to tell you how to find us there, but we know you want to get right into the topic. So just click like and subscribe, and basically let's get into it. This came up because the Valparaiso Crusaders are changing their name because the student body voted to change the name of the team, the mascot, and the school obliged. For a couple of reasons. One, down south, the Crusaders is kind of a KKK term, and obviously, no matter what level of sport you are, you want to distance yourself from that. But also, the Crusades in general was about, Christian soldiers slaughtering Muslim people in the quote-unquote promised land or whatever it is so that they could take over Jerusalem, I have an interesting thing about that. But I'm curious, starting with Sully, what do you think about Crusaders? I mean, is Crusaders a really offensive name, or how do you feel about the team changing?
It's offensive if it's actually deemed like a description of the KKK by somebody, and in that instance, I would be okay with removing it. The Crusades and everything like that. I mean, I don't know. We're going to get rid of knights, everybody that's a knight, and everything like that. I mean, I think that's a little silly. So I don't know. My school that I went to high school with was the Seminole Warhawks, and we removed the war from our name, and now we're just the Seminole Hawks because it was deemed too offensive. So I don't know. I think it's kind of silly, but I understand some aspects of it.
What do you think, Nick? Crusaders, I know that you're kind of you and Sully tend to kind of align on some of your political. This is kind of a political issue, but what do you think about the term Crusaders in general, I guess?
Well, it's funny because the first time this was ever brought up to me was actually I was in high school. Ironically enough, our mascot was the Crusaders. And one of our history teachers jokingly used to tell us, you guys are Muslim killers. That's like what Crusader is. And for me, I think it's tough to say, like, is it offensive to me? Absolutely not. I mean, offensive to me is like subjective, but like the reality of the situation is the country, I should say, that we live in now. I think folks are going to push heavily on these sort of situations and these sort of items much more than what we've seen in the past. So I'm not surprised, I would say. I'm not offended, but I'm not surprised.
Well, and that's my thing is that, I mean, I'm not offended, but I would say that I'm not offended by anything in general. So I don't want to use what I'm offended by as the benchmark of what we should be doing. But I do think, obviously, we are changing a lot of these names. The big one, obviously, was the Washington football team, which after, 80 years of pressure from the Native American, people, they finally changed their name. Now, I'm curious what you guys, because this was the big one. I mean, we're going to talk about a couple other ones, but I'm curious what you think about the Washington Redskins becoming the Washington football team, eventually going to be whatever they're going to be. But, I mean, that's a name that a lot of people were upset by it. And the thing that frustrated me about this was Daniel Snyder quoted a 2004 Annenberg Public Policy Center survey that said 90% of Native Americans were not offended by the term Redskins. And then the Washington Post did a survey as well, and that was also 90% is what they concluded. I will say this. Those two surveys combined polled 1,500 Native Americans. The number one Native American group that was against this, which is the National Congress of American Indians, represents 1.2 million. So 1.2 million or 1,500. You know what I mean? So that's why I don't like that whole 90% of 1,500.
I mean, that name, I think we understand had to be changed. That's like an actual offensive name to somebody. So like that I got. I don't like the idea of the Cleveland Indians changing their name. I don't see anything offensive with – I mean, I guess it is offensive, but I didn't know Indians was offensive. I'm hoping the Braves don't have to change their name. I just don't know where this kind of stops at the end, like when this stops rolling down the hill. But, in Washington's case, I think, we're all laughing a little bit too, because they're the Washington football team at this point, which is kind of a joke. And that's what happens when you get this pressure and you're not prepared and things like that. So it's like, I don't know, it all turned into a show. And, and I think other franchises are going to be wary of that and have a better contingency plan.
Yeah, I'm going to side with Sully on this, and I've always had the take, especially in the case of the Washington football team, that Dan Snyder was so opposed and has been so vocally against changing the team name that my assumption was they're going with the Washington football team out of spite for the political pressure, and when it's sort of in the hope that within a year it blows over and they can just go back to being the Redskins. I think that might not happen now. But that was always my interpretation of things. And I think that the Cleveland Indians thing to me blows my mind, honestly. I'm shocked by that. You have an organization that's been around since the early 40s? They've been the Cleveland Indians. And it's like, why now? Why is that? Why is this the thing now for that organization?
Because times change, right? It's certain things – we become more cognizant or sensitive to them as time goes on. We realize things that we've been saying for 10 years maybe wasn't okay to say. I don't want to.
Okay to say?
Indians not okay to say. I'm genuinely.
Unless you're referring to people who are from India.
Is the proper nomenclature. I understand that. I'm all for Native American, but is calling? I truthfully don't know, and maybe that's where we're probably not the best to be arguing this right now. But, but I don't know if Indian is even deemed offensive to anyone. If I were so I guess there's that aspect that we don't really have the ability to kind of comment on or even see, I guess. But I don't know, because I guess if you say, are you Indian, then 90% of people are going to assume from the country India, or something like that, so I guess that.
Well, because obviously that's what an Indian is somebody from the country of India. And so the Native Americans got called Indians. It's a white name from white people. They didn't call themselves that. White people called them that. And they just started calling themselves that after white people had landed here and called them Indians, thinking they'd landed in India, which they did not. So it is
Native Americans?
No, I think they called themselves Seminoles or Iroquois or whatever. So, and then again, white people just said, "Well, they're all the same," because that's what white people do, right? And said, we're all going to call them this,
Well, so here's my take on that too, because this comes up every year. I see some sort of because I associate a lot of this to the whole cancel culture movement that's out there right now. And every year during Thanksgiving in particular, right? You see this stuff come up about why are we celebrating this? Why are we celebrating genocide of Native American cultures and things like that? Why are we doing this? And I have a controversial take that I can't even claim as my own because it's really Christopher Hitchens, and that what is the difference between warring tribes massacring each other and folks coming to a new country, a new land, and going to war with these same people? Because one has further developed technology? Is that the difference? And what's the greater outcome? Because I would argue that the greater outcome being the current United States of America has resulted in a pretty decent thing for the rest of the world. So you're weighing pros and cons, right? And the pro is white people, white Europeans don't come here, and you have warring tribes just going to war with one another. Or you have white settlers coming here from Europe, going to war against these tribes, establishing what is now the greatest country in the world. I don't know, right? I hold that belief in it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I'd be curious Sully's thoughts on it, because that's not something I discuss very often, but I do believe it.
I've never thought about it that way. And
I didn't when I heard it. So.
Yeah, and it's pretty kind of scary. Like that. Now I hate to think that like, that makes it acceptable, because it doesn't. You know what I mean? Obviously, that nothing's going to make it acceptable, because I mean, the slaughtering of people everywhere isn't a good thing just because you have better technology and they may be fighting. Right. But I mean, so I don't know, like if that argument holds any water, but it is an interesting and kind of, I mean, like logical thought process to a terrible situation. You know what I mean? So I guess,
but I think
it's the best of the bad outcomes.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people try to like transplant that, right? Like they transplant that situation to like what happened with slavery. There are absolutely no pros to slavery in this country. No. I mean, the only thing that you could come up with is the fact that most of, like, for example, like the Treasury buildings and most of the buildings in DC were built brick by brick by unpaid forced labor, right? And if you're going to say that that's the greatest thing that came out of it, it's really not that good.
Yeah.
So, but in the case of the Native Americans, like they get almost lumped in synonymously with what happened during like the slavery era and the civil rights movement and all that stuff, and it's not the same thing. So why are we drawing those same parallels is my question.
I think it's because it's a minority group that's kind of being taken advantage of in a way. And I think that for years and years and years, we were not sensitive to their plight and sensitive to what, they were feeling. We only care about what we thought. Why do we call them Indians? Because that's what we want to call them. Why do we have the Washington Redskins? Because we like calling it that, and it became, the majority feels it's okay. And I feel like we're in a society now, I mean, you call it cancel culture, but I feel like we're in a society now where we can actually listen and say, even though the majority feels this way, we can kind of explore this and see whether or not it's okay, regardless of how many people feel that way.
I don't know. I think the cancel culture is, like you mentioned, it's just a little quick to cut people out when they like don't need, and like going back into people's past and then canceling them now is like one of my biggest gripes. I hate that. But I don't know. I don't feel that you can liken. I get they're both minority issues and things like that, and I get that like we'll never understand honestly like how it feels to be called something like that. But I still don't know where like the line gets drawn. Like at what point does the ball stop rolling, and like is everyone just going to be an animal? Like which okay, fine, that's okay. But like, is that where we go to where everybody's just an animal and everybody changes their name to or a color, like the Browns and is the Browns going to get canceled? Like legit, like I'm not even joking at that point.
Yeah, to me, fair.
Yeah, it could go that way, but I also think that there's certain teams, like you look at, say, Florida State Seminoles, right? The Seminoles are a tribe name. They're not a term that we made up. They call themselves that. And Florida State works very, very much with the tribe to determine the halftime dances that they do. Is this okay? Are you guys okay with this? Can you give us advice and choreograph some of the stuff so that we can make sure that we're not like disrespecting your culture? And they work very closely together. So I think that's a different scenario than the Washington Redskins, or in this case we start off with the Crusaders. Again, I think that the Crusaders, or the term itself, is even if we take the KKK out of it, we just talk about the Crusades. The Crusades was a horrible thing. Yes, it expanded, kind of like America taking over, white, conquistadors taking over America and wiping out Native Americans. The Crusades kind of forced the Europeans into other areas and let them spread, which is not always a good thing. But I'm just saying that the Crusades was bad. There was nothing good that came out of the Crusades. So why celebrate it by naming a team the Crusaders?
I don't know if it's celebrating, though. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, do you pick the Dragons because you're celebrating a dragon? No, you pick the Dragons because it's a cool-ass name. Like I don't know. Like, that's what I mean. Like at what point is it too much? Like, you pick the Crusaders because it's like again, like it's like a knight. Like, I think most people view a Crusader as a knight before they view them as a Muslim killer. Especially when deeming, like, in this context. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's where it's like, I understand it's a bad and it has bad history or whatever it may be, but I mean, again, at what point does it stop? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't look at it as like they're I'm with Sully. I don't look at it as like a political decision or something like that. I mean, you don't have schools out there calling themselves the, Northeastern High School Wahhabi, right? Like, I mean, that no one's going to do that. When I thought of a Crusader when I was in high school, until I was told by that history teacher, I thought a Crusader, it's like they didn't want to be lame and call themselves the Knights, so they went with a Crusader.
So you're talking about the difference between being ignorant and willfully ignorant. So ignorant is not understanding what the Crusader actually is. And then once you find out what it is, kind of turning a blind eye to it because, but we've had that name for so long, so I'll be willfully ignorant about it. Yeah,
but again, like they're not it's all context. Like you're not picking it. So knights can't be used either then because we're knights.
No, but knighthood is a title that you've received. It's not like a Crusader is very specific. So I understand what you're saying. It's a slippery slope, and you can start attaching all kinds of things. Like, why don't we have this? We can't call ourselves the White Stripes because white. That's kind of crazy. But Crusader, on its own, without any other context, Crusader is a Crusader, which is somebody who killed Muslims, and that's it. That's a fact. And so knights, yes, some of them were knights, but knighthood is like I said, it's a title that was given to you by the king.
I guess. I don't know.
I think this is like one of those things where we're just, I think to Sully's point though, we're going to see more extremes with it. I don't think it's going to be as cut and dry as sort of like how you're explaining it now with like the ignorance and being willfully ignorant around like the Crusaders, for example, right? Like, I don't think also that there's any like malicious intent incorporated into these names, right? Like, I think it's some arbitrary decision that gets made in a public, in like typically a public university or a public high school.
It's voted.
Athletic department sometimes, so parents voting, and like I don't think there's malice attached to any of it. If there were, then obviously I think that we should correct it, right? I don't know. So I think intent is huge. Right? Like measuring intent. I mean, that's what our legal system does. You look at the action, but you're also measuring intent, right? And if there's collateral damage on something, that's something that you almost always have to anticipate for anything.
Well, but to that statement, though, the Washington Redskins was not malicious in intent. They weren't saying, hey, we're going to throw a slur on there because we think it's hilarious. But it's not.
Well, I think the Redskins is the outlier here because it's an actual derogatory term. So, like, I think that's the outlier. Like, that one, everybody, even me and Nick, who side with, most of the time on the other side, agree that Redskins, like, just change your name at that point. Like, come on, guys. Pick something. If you want to stay Native American theme, work with the Native Americans. Pick a tribe that was near that area and work with them and try to figure out something like that, like the Florida State Seminoles have done, or something like that. Also, sharks kill 250 people. Our lions kill 250 people every year. Are we gonna get rid of lions?
No.
Detroit Lions need to change their name because they're killing people?
Well, I think that lions aren't differentiating their killing based on race or religion or political ideology. They just are animals and they kill.
How do you know that?
You ever spoken to a lion? Because there's been studies on it. They do study the psychology of lions, believe it or not. I don't, but they do study it. And they are they're animal instincts. They're territorial and they're just reacting on territory, or they get scared and they're just reacting out of fear. Humans have the ability to decipher what they're doing. And I think that's the difference. And I know it's funny to make a crazy comparison. I think you know that, but it's obviously a huge difference between animals and humans.
I do, and I understand. I'm just saying, like where does it end? You know what I mean? That's all.
And I think, like, if we're gonna allocate, professional sports teams' names down to individual Native American tribes, I don't want to even say Indian anymore. So if we're gonna push that down, you're gonna definitely offend somebody. Because to my point earlier, tribes were warring with one another since longer than it was there's any historical records on them. So, I mean, like, you're going to end up offending somebody always in these situations if you go the Native American naming route.
That's true.
And I think that's where I think it's okay to have a discussion every single time. It doesn't necessarily have to go a certain way every time, but I think it's okay to have a discussion every time. And if the discussion is ruled that, hey, listen, it just is offensive and people can make good points about why it's offensive, then get rid of it. I mean, why put up a huge fight about it? And that's the thing that I think I have a hard time with, because like I said, I don't care. I'm not offended. If you want to change your team name, if they say, hey, we're changing the Browns to, the Airplanes, we're going to be the Cleveland Airplanes for whatever reason. I mean, I think it's dumb, but I'm not going to get offended and be upset about it. So my thing is, why are people getting upset other than the fact that people just don't like change?
I think again, it's not really. The people who get upset are the crazies, for one. Like they're the 1% on either side that it's just shut up. Nobody wants to listen to you, but they're the loudest ones. I think most of us, who don't really agree, are like me and Nick, who are just, I mean, I couldn't care less, but at the same time, like it's just the whole. I'll repeat where does it stop? And that's what gets frustrating, I think. And that's why it gets, brought up and it's, I don't know, it's that slippery slope, and eventually it's going to get to the Browns. And then it's just silly and stupid. And you know what I mean? And we've got to figure out a way, like I said, go to all animals and nobody can get mad.
Okay. I like the Washington Red Wolves. I know just to touch on the point, I know we talked about, Nick, I know you'd said that you felt like the Washington football team, that they were kind of unprepared for the change, and that's how we ended up with Washington football team. I know we've talked on our show a couple of times. I think that they wanted to be the Red Wolves or the Red Tails or something like that, but some guy came along and bought up like 25 copyrights of all the different names, and so they're entrenched in this legal battle about what name they can use. So I think they're just trying to work it out with him and pay him whatever he's asking for whatever name that they want, because he's got one of 25 names that they were considering.
Well, that's good too, because this can all be avoided if everybody just takes the North Carolina approach, because all the team names down here where I live are stupid. It's either the Hornets or the Bobcats or the Panthers, right? You know what I mean? Those are all dumb. I mean, I don't know that anybody's ever seen a Panther in North Carolina.
Well, Tar Heels are an Indian tribe, right?
Are they? Is that? I thought a Tar Heel was like a historical name for like early settlers in the region. I could be wrong. I don't know my history on it.
I got you.
Yeah, Sully, can you do some recon here and let me know what a Tar Heel is?
Yeah. Well, the Duke Blue Devils. I mean, no, Devils are bad, right? We took them out of Rays. You got Rays.
Well, see, I'm personally offended by that. I'm not comfortable going. You know what I mean? It makes me feel like I'm in a bad place if I go to a game.
Well, especially as a North Carolina fan, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think.
It's about people working in North Carolina. They'd have like a patch of like sap and they called rosin heel or tar heel.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Oh, see that? Yeah. See, I didn't know. I didn't think it was like a Native American. The schools and the pro teams down here, they like to keep it simple. Remember when they did the whole Charlotte Bobcats thing? How ridiculous was that? And then they drafted Adam Morrison, which was even worse than being called the Bobcats. Anyway, so that's a different topic. But
I live in Florida and we see Panthers all the time. So I mean,
oh, do you? That makes sense to the hockey team.
Yeah.
So, this obviously has been going on for a really long time, and I had a note here that actually the 1969 Philadelphia Warriors, when they moved to San Francisco, they changed their logo to the Golden Gate Bridge because it was like a Native American, like beating a drum or something like that, as the Warriors. And I thought, of course it's California is the first one that would like really make that change. And not to get too like states or whatever, but I mean, why is that? Why is California kind of the front runner on sensitivity to minorities, and why does the rest of the country kind of sneer at them for it?
You know the reason for that.
What's the reason?
We know the reason for that. I mean, California is like the most liberal state in the country, like as far as like, being like progressive and all that, but also like they're also the entire state's basically run by the media culture and the celebrity culture. I mean, that's why Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor for a period of time. You know what I mean? Like it's things like that. And in the media, Wayne, you talk about this all the time. The media sort of like feeds the information to the rest of the people for us to gain knowledge from, right? And the celeb culture is championed heavily all throughout the country now, but especially so, I think, in places like California in particular. Look at LeBron's take on like China, for example, right? Like, this is the sort of thing that I'm talking about. And we're talking about, like, offensiveness, right? Like, what's offensive? You guys know I'm a big soccer guy. And you have every year during a certain point of the season, you'll have every team wearing the red poppy. But I'll tell you who doesn't wear the red poppy are a lot of Irish players that are playing in England will not wear that poppy because they're not going to look in solidarity with the British Army. They're not. I mean, and nor should they, in my opinion. So that it's controversial. It brings it up every year, but all right, some players wear it, some players don't, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, we respect your beliefs. I think for some of these team changes, there can just be that agreement. All right, we don't like the name, but we respect your belief. You know, it's not it's offensive to some, so, you know, don't cheer for us, basically. Right? Like, why can't it be that simple?
I personally think it should be as well. You know, again, removing the Washington football team because we all agree that that's bad.
They're the outlier.
Exactly. They're the outlier. But other than that, I agree. You know, it's kind of like, you know, I don't look at you. You don't look at me. Like, let's just go our separate ways. You don't like me. That's fine. Like, that's okay. You don't have to like me, but you don't cheer for me then. But this is my team. Like, I agree. I think that's kind of, you know, the way it should be taken, and it's not. And, you know, California too, I'm going to, you know, I don't know if there's any truth, but, you know, the 50s, 60s, 70s and the rush of the hippie culture to California, and then that culture settling there, and then those people then raising more and more hippie cultures. You know, I'm not saying that is a reason, but that would be my thought process on why California is as liberal as it is. But, you know, I mean, it's difficult. You're never going to, like, you're always going to offend somebody. So at what point, you know, is somebody too many?
Well, that's what we had for the show. I definitely appreciate everybody tuning in. And I mentioned it at the start of the show. If you do want to listen to the show rather than watch it, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and Amazon Music. You can download, stream the episode, listen to it while you're driving, going for a run, whatever it is. You can also find us on social media. On Facebook, we are at Infinity Sports Podcast. On Instagram, we are at Infinity Sports Podcast. And on Twitter, we are at Sports Infinity 5. So definitely check us out. Hit us up. Let us know what you think. If you disagree with us, we'd love to hear it. And like I said, we'll bring it up on a future episode. All right. I guess I'll say bye. All right. See you, Kenny. Kenny, what's up?
Kenny.